Hey, it's Michael Smerconish. Welcome back to the program, and thank you so much for being here. I want to shift gears and talk about Israel. And at the conclusion of a conversation with a special guest, I'll include phone calls at 877-434-1776. Today's poll question at Smerconish.com asks, do you approve of the way in which Israeli special forces intercepted the Mavi Marmara? Far more known about this today than when we first began our conversations about it 2-3 days ago. Go to the website and cast a ballot on that question. George Birnbaum was Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's chief of staff. He's now a political consultant with clients around the world. They include the mayor of Jerusalem and others in the Israeli government. I believe that Mr. Birnbaum is now based in Atlanta. Mr. Birnbaum, thanks for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Good morning. Good to be here, Michael.
May we do Flotilla for Dummies, and I will be the dummy-in-chief, because I think that some of the news reports that I am following have assumptions about people's level of knowledge about this case that might not be accurate. So let's go through it at its most rudimentary level if we can, all right?
Sure. And if I could, I'd like to start with Blockade for Dummies 101.
Nice. Do it.
Under international law, any government, country, or entity that is in a state of war or state of conflict with another government entity or political entity has a right to blockade goods going into that country with the intent to make sure that arms and other dangerous weapons are not going into that country or entity.
Including in international waters?
Now, that's the second piece of it. Under international maritime law, that same country that is in a state of conflict has a right protect and maintain the security of that blockade in international waters by boarding any ship that is deemed suspect to having weapons going into that country or entity.
Okay.
So first we should say that intercepting a ship that's trying to run a blockade is perfectly acceptable in international waters by international maritime law and not an act of piracy. So the first thing the Israelis did
wait. Now I want to ask another fundamental question. Sure. Why does this blockade exist?
This blockade exists because there is a terrorist organization called Hamas that was democratically elected to run the Gaza Strip for the 1.5 million Palestinian people living in the Gaza Strip. Hamas, being a terrorist organization with a contiguous border with Israel, was deemed to be too dangerous to be allowed to have a free flow of goods into the country because those goods were being directly used in terror acts against Israeli citizens. It is, in fact, a blockade that the Egyptians participate in as well. So it is not a unilateral blockade. It is actually a blockade participated with the Egyptians, and quite frankly, no one in the international community for the several years that this blockade has existed has protested the right to this blockade.
All right. In the case of this flotilla, by the way, I'm not accustomed to using the word flotilla. My maritime lingo is not up to snuff, so I'll ask it this way.
Sure.
How many boats were in this this confab or whatever it was that was headed toward Gaza?
There were 6 boats.
Okay.
That left out of ports in Cyprus, Turkish Cyprus. The 6 boats were warned several weeks ago, because this was not a surprise, by the Israeli government not to try and run this blockade. In fact, they were told, if indeed you have only humanitarian goods on board, bring the boats to one of our ports. We will inspect the goods, and if in fact there are just humanitarian goods on board, we will allow all the goods in their entirety to continue on to the Gaza Strip.
Did any of the 6 accept that invitation?
None of them did. All 6 the other night tried to run the blockade. All 6 were intercepted by the Israeli Navy, 5 of which were boarded without incident. The Mavi Marmaris, as you mentioned, was boarded with quite serious consequences.
All right, let me slow you down. The 5 that were boarded without incident, were they boarded in the same fashion as the Marmara?
The exact same fashion.
All right, but in that case, they were met with no resistance, no fights, no skirmish, nobody died.
Correct.
Was anything untoward found on those 5? Any weapons and any missiles that could have been launched from Gaza into Israel?
No, missiles were not found. But let me explain the reason for the suspicion. And I think the Prime Minister yesterday in his press conference laid out a pretty good case for probable cause.
Right.
But I'd like to get into a little more detail. Several of these ships were sponsored by a group known as the Insani Yardim Vakfi, known as the Humanitarian Relief Fund. This is an organization that has worldwide connections to Al-Qaeda and international terrorism. In fact, the Obama Treasury Department lists them as an SDGT, a specially designated global terrorist group. They were the ones who helped fund Ahmed Rassam, the Millennium Bomber, who crossed from Canada into the United States with over 1,000 pounds of explosives headed for Los Angeles International Airport. They have funded jihad in Afghanistan, in Chechnya, in Bosnia. This is not a nice group.
All right, this is the reason for the heightened level of concern on the part of IDF.
There was, yes. Once the IDF, once the Israeli intelligence community knew that this type of group was sponsoring the flotilla, there was every reason to believe that there was a chance that these people, the peace activists on these boats, were being used as decoys to smuggle something much more devastating into the Gaza Strip.
All right. This, by the way, is George Birnbaum. For how long were you Bibi Netanyahu's chief of staff in his role as Israeli prime minister?
I served with Mr. Netanyahu for about 2 years.
Okay. You're perfect for what I wanted. I wanted somebody to break it down by its component parts, and I'm very appreciative. Now let's focus on the Marmara. What transpired on board that ship?
What transpired was the same thing that transpired on the other 5 ships. An initial wave of Israeli naval commandos landed unarmed with any kind of deadly weapon, only with paintball guns in their hands.
But didn't they have sidearms as well?
They did have sidearms, which is a matter of protocol, but they were not drawn. They did not land with them drawn. Obviously, when you go into a combat situation as a commando, you land or go in with your weapons drawn.
Why the paintball guns? Were they meant to signify that they were something more than paintballs?
No, I think it was a matter of crowd control. They felt that if one or two of the activists would try and rush them, that a paintball gun would be sufficient to deter them.
Just to sort of startle them or some such thing?
Yeah, take them by surprise.
Okay, so they rappel, I guess is the lingo. They rappel on board the Marmara, and we've all seen film footage. You tell me, what am I watching in that footage?
Well, some rappelled, some were on small chase boats that came up the side of the boats, but when they got on board, they were immediately attacked with metal rods, knives, Molotov cocktails, flash grenades.
Any guns?
No, they had, in a couple of instances, a few of the commandos who were surrounded by 15 or 20 people and being beaten up had their sidearms removed from them and then subsequently used against them.
Were any IDF soldiers injured?
Yes, several were seriously injured. One was shot in the knee. Others were shot in the arm, and others received severe fractures and breaks to their bones because they were being beaten with metal rods and pipes.
How did the 9 die who were killed, presumably by IDF forces?
By the subsequent wave of commandos that came in to rescue their comrades, they were given permission to use live fire to defend themselves.
Did the IDF find anything on the Marmara? I asked previously about the other 5 boats. How about on the Marmara itself? And I'm thinking specifically of weapons that could have been fired from Gaza into Israel.
Right. Well, they found some light weapons, but more importantly, what they did find was that about 40 of the activists on board were hired mercenaries, if you will, by Al-Qaeda. They were each caught with an equal amount of money, 20,000 euros on money belts on their person. Their backgrounds were well known to Israeli intelligence. And so it's clear that not all the people, most of the people, not all the people on these boats were not going with the intent of peace and humanitarian goodwill.
What do you believe they were going there to do?
Well, I believe I think the flotilla in and of itself was a bitter pill for Israel. It was a PR stunt that the organizers knew would result in positive PR for them and negative PR for Israel. I mean, if the blockade was run, it's a victory for the organizers. If a boat was sunk, it's a victory for the organizers. If what happened actually did happen, it's also a victory for the organizers. So I think the whole point of the flotilla was to generate positive PR for the organizers and negative PR for Israel.
George Birnbaum, before I cut you loose, anything else about the underlying facts that you wanted to make sure you expressed to my audience?
Well, as the Prime Minister said yesterday, I mean, the people on board were not only peace activists. Many of them were, but some were not. Some of these people who claim to be peace activists would be calling like the 9/11 hijackers student pilots.
Well, that was another of my questions. I wanted to know what was actually found on the Marmara, but also because they were taken into custody, and I'm not sure at what stage of their release we are now, but my hunch is that the IDF, working with Mossad by now, would have run some serious profiles of each of those individuals, and if there were known terrorists on board, that information would be forthcoming. Do you know anything about that?
Most of the people taken into custody were released, already, but several others who were known to be either hired guns or have connections to Al-Qaeda certainly are going to be investigated further and will be dealt with accordingly.
But any names that we're aware of now where you can say, hey, so-and-so was on the Marmara, this guy is a known, evil seed who has carried out car bombings and so forth?
I don't have that information as of yet.
Okay. You did a great job. I am very appreciative of your time, and I certainly will be inviting you back.
My pleasure, Michael. Good morning.
All right.